Hello, and welcome. I am glad you have found your way here tonight to this quiet sanctuary of ink, parchment, and prayer. We are about to spend a day in a medieval scriptorium, long and slow journey into a world of meticulous work and profound silence. This story is designed simply for calm and for rest. There's no need to follow every word. Feel free to let your mind drift with the slow creation of the manuscript and to fall asleep whenever you are ready. Find your most comfortable position. Close your eyes and listen to the quiet sounds of a life dedicated to preserving knowledge in a dark age. Our journey tonight takes us into the heart of a secluded monastery, a place governed by the rhythm of the bells. We will explore the sacred labor of a monk scribe, a life of agonizing patience and divine purpose. So rest now and listen. Our story begins in the cold, deep blackness of a night in the year of our Lord 1250. We are in the heart of a Benedictine monastery, a great stone abbey nestled in a remote, quiet valley, a place where the clamor of the outside world fades into an insignificant whisper. The world beyond these walls is a place of feudal conflict, of burgeoning towns, and of the ever-present threat of plague and famine.
Ow.
But within these thick stone walls, a different kind of life unfolds. One governed not by the whims of kings, but by the unchanging, eternal rhythm of the bells. In a large, cold, and dark dormitory, a young monk we shall call Brother Thomas lies on a simple straw pallet. He is not asleep. He is waiting. He has learned over his 5 years in the monastery to wake a few moments before the bell, his body so attuned to the rigid schedule that it has become an internal clock. The room is filled with the soft rhythmic breathing of 50 other monks, their bodies wrapped in rough woolen habits, their sleep a brief, necessary respite in a life of constant devotion. The air is frigid, and the only warmth comes from the shared heat of these sleeping bodies. Then it comes, single, clear, and resonant toll from the great bell in the monastery's central tower. It is 2 o'clock in the morning. It is the call to matins, the first of the 8 daily canonical hours of prayer. The sound is not jarring, but it is absolute. It is the voice of God, calling his servants to their first duty of the day, a duty that must be performed before the sun itself is even considered rising. Instantly, the dormitory comes to life. There is no groaning, no hesitation, no sleepy fumbling for an alarm. The monks rise as one from their hard beds, their movements swift and silent in the practiced dark. They are governed by the rule of Saint Benedict, a sacred text that dictates every moment of their lives, from the prayers they chant to the food they eat. And the rule commands that they rise without delay for the work of God, for to be lazy in the service of the Lord is a grave sin. In the darkness, they pull on their simple, rough woolen habits and their leather sandals. Their movements practiced and efficient. They move not as individuals, but as a single, silent body. A river of dark-robed figures flowing out of the dormitory and through the cold, stone-flagged cloister. The only light comes from the high, distant moon, which casts long, ghostly shadows across the central courtyard. The air is bitingly cold, and their breath plumes in front of them, small white ghosts in the darkness. They enter the great chapel. The church is a vast cavernous space, its high vaulted ceilings lost in an impenetrable darkness far above. The air is frigid, the cold radiating from the massive stone pillars in the floor, a deep, ancient cold that seems to live within the very stones themselves. The only light comes from a few flickering tallow candles on the high altar, their small flames a tiny defiant spark against the immense holy darkness. The air smells of cold stone, of melting wax, and of the sweet, lingering scent of old incense that has seeped into the wood of the choir stalls over centuries. The monks take their places, their movements synchronized and silent. And then the abbot, his voice a deep and resonant bass, begins the service. The first notes of the Gregorian chant, a low, sonorous, and otherworldly sound, rise into the cold air. The monks respond, their voices joining together to create a single, powerful, beautiful wave of sound that fills the dark, empty church. It is a sound that has been sung in this very space, at this very hour, for hundreds of years. They will stand for the next 2 hours, their bodies cold, their stomachs empty, chanting the Psalms, listening to the readings from the Scriptures. This is not a time for personal emotional prayer. It is the Opus Dei, the work of God, a formal, structured, and communal act of worship. For Brother Thomas, this pre-dawn ritual is a time of profound peace, a moment to anchor his soul, to empty his mind of all worldly thoughts before the labors of the day begin. After Matins, there is a brief period for private study or contemplation in the cloister, and then another service lauds to greet the first, faint hint of the coming dawn. Only after this, as the sky in the east begins to turn from black to a pale, watery gray, are they allowed their first meal. They file into the refectory, a long, high-ceilinged hall with tall, narrow windows. The meal, like every aspect of their lives, is governed by strict ritual. They eat in complete and total silence. Conversation is forbidden. At the front of the hall, one of the brothers stands at a lectern and reads aloud from a sacred text, often the lives of the saints. The purpose is to provide spiritual nourishment while the others take their physical sustenance. The food is meager, simple, and unvarying. Small loaf of coarse, dark bread, and a mug of weak, slightly sour ale. It is a functional meal designed to give them the energy for the day's work, but not to provide any pleasure. Gluttony is a sign, and the simple, repetitive diet is a constant. Physical reminder of their vow of poverty and their detachment from the worldly pleasures of the flesh. After the meal, the monks disperse to their assigned labors. Some will go to the fields to tend the crops, others to the kitchens, the infirmary, or the forge. But for Brother Thomas, a man with a steady hand, good eyesight, and a patient soul, his work lies elsewhere. He makes his way to the most important room in the monastery, after the chapel itself. He goes to the Scriptorium. The Scriptorium, or writing room, is a quiet, well-lit space, often located on an upper floor to ensure it receives the best natural light of the day. The air inside smells of parchment, of ink, of beeswax, and of the dry, sweet scent of old pressed flowers used to make pigments. This is the intellectual and artistic heart of the monastery, the place where knowledge is preserved, copied, and created. It is a silent, holy factory of the written word. Thomas takes his place at his designated desk, a simple, sloped wooden lectern. Before him lies his life's work. It is a great unbound manuscript, the pages made of fine, creamy vellum, the prepared skin of a calf. For the past 3 years, he has been painstakingly copying the text of the 4 Gospels, a task that might take him another decade to complete. It is a slow, arduous, and sacred task, and he has only just begun the Gospel of Mark. He takes out his tools. They are simple, but they are the tools of a master craftsman. There is a small razor-sharp knife for trimming his quill pens. There is a lump of pumice stone for smoothing the surface of the parchment, and a piece of lead for making faint, preliminary rulings. There is an inkhorn made from a real horn filled with a dark, rich black ink made from oak galls and iron salts. And there are his pens, a selection of goose feather quills that he has carefully cut and shaped himself. He sits for a moment in the profound silence of the room, a silence broken only by the distant sound of the monastery bell, the soft rustle of a turning page, or the faint, almost imperceptible scratching of another brother's quill. He says a silent prayer, a request for guidance and for a steady hand. He dips his pen into the ink, and with a focus that is a form of meditation, a focus that dissolves the outside world, he begins his sacred labor. The work of a scribe was a slow, deliberate, and deeply physical act. Before a single letter could be formed, the page itself had to be prepared. Brother Thomas takes a fresh sheet of vellum. It is a beautiful material, creamy and smooth, but it is also a natural product, and it has imperfections. He uses a small, curved knife to gently scrape away any small hairs or rough patches, his movements careful and precise. He then takes a piece of pumice stone and rubs the entire surface of the page, making it perfectly smooth and ready to receive the ink. Next, he must rule the page. Using a sharp stylus, he creates a series of faint, almost invisible lines that will guide his writing. He does not use a ruler, but a complex system of pricks and holes made along the edge of the page, which allows him to create a perfect, consistent grid. The process is one of pure geometric precision. The page is now a blank but ordered universe, waiting to be filled. The tools of his trade are simple, but each one is a work of art in itself. His quill pens, made from the flight feathers of a goose, he has prepared himself. He has hardened them by curing them in hot sand, and he has carved the nib to a perfect sharp point with his small penknife. He must resharpen this point constantly, every few lines of text. A small, repetitive ritual that is a vital part of the writing process. His ink is a dark, rich black, made from a complex recipe of oak galls, iron salts, and gum arabic. He has another, smaller pot of red ink, made from ground minerals or insects, which will be used for the titles and the first letter of a new chapter. These inks are not just colors, they are a part of the sacred art, a way to give beauty and permanence to the holy words he is copying. The most important rule of the Scriptorium, the rule that governed every moment of their work, was the vow of silence. The Scriptorium was a place of profound, almost holy, quiet. The monks were not permitted to speak. This was not just a rule of discipline, it was a spiritual practice. The silence was meant to prevent errors in copying, but also to allow the scribe to focus his entire being, his mind and his soul, on the sacred task at hand. But the work still required communication. The monks developed a complex and elegant sign language to communicate their needs. If a brother needed a new book, he would make a gesture of turning a page. If he needed more ink, he would make a small circular motion with his fingers, as if grinding the ingredients. It was a silent, graceful ballet of communication that allowed the great work of the Scriptorium to continue without the profane interruption of the spoken word. And so, Brother Thomas begins to write. His posture is erect, his back straight. He holds the quill pen at a precise angle. He does not write quickly. Each letter is a slow, deliberate, and perfectly formed act of creation. He is copying from an older master manuscript that rests on a stand beside him. His eyes move from the master text to his own page, his mind carefully holding the shape of the words. The sound of his quill on the vellum is a soft, dry, scratching sound, a tiny, intimate noise in the great silence of the room. It is the sound of knowledge being preserved, of a story being told across the centuries. He works in a state of deep, meditative focus. The outside world, with its wars, its famines, and its plagues, disappears. There is only the page, the ink, and the sacred words. The day is punctuated by the ringing of the monastery bells, the only clock he needs. At the third hour, the bell for terce rings, and the monks lay down their pens and file back to the chapel for a short service of prayer. Then they return to their work. At the sixth hour, the bell for sext rings, and they break for the midday meal. At the ninth hour, the bell for none calls them to prayer again. This is the rhythm of his life, a steady, unchanging cycle of work and worship. By the end of the day, as the light begins to fail and the bell for vespers, the evening prayer rings through the monastery. Brother Thomas has completed perhaps only a single page of text. His back aches from the long hours of sitting in the same position. His eyes are strained from the intense focus. His fingers are stained with ink. He carefully cleans his quill pens, corks his ink pots, and covers his precious manuscript with a protective cloth. He has spent an entire day in the service of these holy words, a day of profound, silent, and deeply meaningful labor. He leaves the Scriptorium and makes his way back to the chapel for the evening prayers, his soul at peace. He is a scribe, a guardian of the flame of knowledge in a dark and often ignorant world. The bell for prime, the first hour of daylight, has rung, and the monks have returned from the chapel. For Brother Thomas, this signals the true beginning of his workday. He enters the Scriptorium, the great writing room of the abbey. The world of bells, chants, and communal prayer is replaced by a world of profound, focused silence. This is the realm of the sacred labor, the slow and meticulous art of creating a manuscript. The work of a scribe was not simply a matter of writing. It was a long and arduous process that began long before a single letter was formed. It began with the creation of the very surface he would write on, vellum or parchment. The monastery had its own dedicated workshops for this. And while Thomas was a scribe, he understood and had participated in the difficult, smelly, and physically demanding process. It began with an animal, usually a calf or a sheep, whose skin would be carefully flayed. The fresh skin was then soaked for several days in a vat of lime water, a caustic solution that loosened the hair and fat. The stench from these lime pits was a powerful and unpleasant odor that hung over that part of the monastery grounds. After soaking, the skin was draped over a curved wooden frame, and a worker would use a long curved knife to scrape away every last trace of hair and flesh. It was a slimy, unpleasant, and exhausting job. Once scraped, the skin was attached to a large circular wooden frame, stretched as taut as a drumhead. As it dried, it would shrink and become thin and translucent. The parchment maker would then work the surface for hours with a crescent-shaped knife called a lunellum, carefully shaving it down to a uniform, paper-like thickness. Finally, the dried, prepared sheet was rubbed for hours with a pumice stone to create a perfectly smooth, almost velvety surface ready to receive the ink. A single large book, like the Bible Thomas was working on, could require the skins of over 200 calves. It was an incredibly expensive and labor-intensive material. The ink, too, was a product of a complex, almost alchemical process. Made within the monastery walls, standard black ink, the lifeblood of the scriptorium, was iron gall ink. It was made by crushing oak galls, the hard, round growths that form on oak trees where a wasp has laid its eggs into a fine powder. This powder, rich in tannic acid, was then mixed with water and iron sulfate, a mineral known as vitriol or copperas. A binding agent, usually gum arabic, the hardened sap of the acacia tree, was added to give the ink its body and flow. The resulting liquid was a deep, purplish black, permanent ink that would actually burn itself into the surface of the vellum over time. The red ink, used for headings and important titles, a process called rubrication. From the Latin for red, was made from ground-up minerals like cinnabar, which contained toxic mercury, or from vermilion, a pigment derived from the same source. The creation of these inks was a specialized and often secret art, the knowledge passed down from one monk to the next. With his materials prepared, Thomas could finally begin the work of the scribe. His first task of the morning was to prepare his pens. He would take a flight feather from a goose, the best and most common source for a quill. He would harden it by curing it in hot sand, a process that made the tip less likely to split. Then, with a small razor-sharp penknife, he would begin the delicate and highly skilled process of carving the nib. He had to cut the tip at a precise angle, then make a small vertical slit to draw the ink down. And finally, trim the very end to the exact width required for the specific script he was writing. A well-cut quill was a scribe's most important possession, and he would have to resharpen this point constantly. Every few lines of text, a small, repetitive ritual that was a vital part of the writing process. Finally, he would turn to the page itself. Using a sharp stylus and a complex system of pricks made along the edge of the page, he would create a faint, almost invisible grid of lines to guide his writing. This ensured that every line was perfectly straight. Every letter was of a uniform height, and the columns of text were perfectly aligned. The process was one of pure geometric precision. The page was now a blank but ordered universe, waiting to be filled. The most important rule of the Scriptorium, the rule that governed every moment of their work, was the vow of silence. The Scriptorium was a place of profound, almost holy, quiet. The monks were not permitted to speak. This was not just a rule of discipline. It was a spiritual practice. The silence was meant to prevent errors in copying, but also to allow the scribe to focus his entire being, his mind and his soul, on the sacred task at hand, but the work still required communication. The monks developed a complex and elegant sign language to communicate their needs. If a brother needed a new book to copy from, he would make a gesture of turning a page. If he needed more ink, he would make a small circular motion with his fingers, as if grinding the ingredients. If he had made a mistake and needed to scrape it from the page, he would make a scratching motion with his finger. It was a silent, graceful ballet of communication that allowed the great work of the Scriptorium to continue without the profane interruption of the spoken word. And so, Brother Thomas begins to write. His posture is erect, his back straight. He holds the quill pen at a precise angle. He does not write quickly. Each letter is a slow, deliberate, and perfectly formed act of creation. He is copying from an older master manuscript that rests on a stand beside him. His eyes move from the master text to his own page, his mind carefully holding the shape of the words. The sound of his quill on the vellum is a soft, dry, scratching sound, a tiny, intimate noise in the great silence of the room. Is the sound of knowledge being preserved, of a story being told across the centuries. He works in a state of deep, meditative focus. The outside world, with its wars, its famines, and its plagues, disappears. There is only the page, the ink, and the sacred words. This was the sacred labor, a quiet, patient, and deeply meaningful battle against the darkness and the ignorance of the age. The work of a scribe was a slow, deliberate, and deeply physical act. Before a single letter could be formed, the page itself had to be prepared. Brother Thomas takes a fresh sheet of vellum. It is a beautiful material, creamy and smooth, but it is also a natural product, and it has imperfections. He uses a small, curved knife to gently scrape away any small hairs or rough patches, his movements careful and precise. He then takes a piece of pumice stone and rubs the entire surface of the page, making it perfectly smooth and ready to receive the ink. Next, he must rule the page. Using a sharp stylus, he creates a series of faint, almost invisible lines that will guide his writing. He does not use a ruler, but a complex system of pricks and holes made along the edge of the page, which allows him to create a perfect, consistent grid. The process is one of pure geometric precision. The page is now a blank but ordered universe, waiting to be filled. The tools of his trade are simple, but each one is a work of art in itself. His quill pens, made from the flight feathers of a goose, he has prepared himself. He has hardened them by curing them in hot sand, and he has carved the nib to a perfect sharp point with his small penknife. He must resharpen this point constantly. Every few lines of text, a small, repetitive ritual that is a vital part of the writing process. His ink is a dark, rich black, made from a complex recipe of oak galls, iron salts, and gum arabic. He has another, smaller pot of red ink, made from ground minerals or insects, which will be used for the titles and the first letter of a new chapter. These inks are not just colors, they are a part of the sacred art, a way to give beauty and permanence to the holy words he is copying. The most important rule of the Scriptorium, the rule that governed every moment of their work, was the vow of silence. The Scriptorium was a place of profound, almost holy, quiet. The monks were not permitted to speak. This was not just a rule of discipline, it was a spiritual practice. The silence was meant to prevent errors in copying, but also to allow the scribe to focus his entire being, his mind and his soul, on the sacred task at hand. But the work still required communication. The monks developed a complex and elegant sign language to communicate their needs. If a brother needed a new book, he would make a gesture of turning a page. If he needed more ink, he would make a small circular motion with his fingers, as if grinding the ingredients. It was a silent, graceful ballet of communication that allowed the great work of the Scriptorium to continue without the profane interruption of the spoken word. And so, Brother Thomas begins to write. His posture is erect, his back straight, holds the quill pen at a precise angle, does not write quickly. Each letter is a slow, deliberate, and perfectly formed act of creation. He is copying from an older master manuscript that rests on a stand beside him. His eyes move from the master text to his own page, his mind carefully holding the shape of the words. The sound of his quill on the vellum is a soft, dry, scratching sound, a tiny, intimate noise in the great silence of the room. It is the sound of knowledge being preserved, of a story being told across the centuries. He works in a state of deep, meditative focus. The outside world, with its wars, its famines, and its plagues, disappears. There is only the page, the ink, and the sacred words. The day is punctuated by the ringing of the monastery bells, the only clock he needs. At the third hour, the bell for terce rings, and the monks lay down their pens and file back to the chapel for a short service of prayer. Then they return to their work. At the sixth hour, the bell for sext rings, and they break for the midday meal. At the ninth hour, the bell for none calls them to prayer again. This is the rhythm of his life, a steady, unchanging cycle of work and worship. After hours of flawless, focused work, it happens. A tiny, almost imperceptible tremor in his hand, a moment's lapse in concentration. A single dark drop of ink falls from his quill, landing on the pristine, creamy surface of the vellum. It is a small black star in a perfect white universe, a catastrophic and heartbreaking accident. The entire page, the work of a full day, is now ruined. A modern writer would simply discard the page and start again. But for Brother Thomas, this is not an option. The vellum is incredibly precious, the result of weeks of labor. The page cannot be thrown away. The error must be erased. This was one of the most nerve-wracking and difficult tasks a scribe could face. He must wait for the ink to dry completely. He sits there for what feels like an eternity, staring at the black spot, a symbol of his own human imperfection. Once the ink is dry, he takes out his sharpest, finest penknife. With a surgeon's precision and a touch as light as a feather, he begins to gently, meticulously scrape the dried ink from the surface of the vellum. The work is agonizingly slow. He must scrape away only the thin layer of ink without tearing or weakening the delicate animal skin beneath. A single clumsy movement, a moment of too much pressure, could create a hole in the page. A disaster that would be far worse than the original ink blot. The only sound in the room is the faint, dry, whispering sound of his blade on the parchment. After what feels like an hour of this tense, microscopic labor, the black spot is gone. The surface of the vellum is slightly rougher in that spot, a barely perceptible scar, but the page is saved. He then takes a piece of smooth bone or a stone and rubs the spot for a long time, burnishing the vellum until it is almost as smooth as it was before. Only now can he attempt to write the correct letter in the repaired space. This constant threat of the irreversible error was the great psychological burden of the scribe. They were not just writers, they were guardians of a sacred text. Every letter had to be perfect, a worthy vessel for the holy word. The pressure to be flawless was immense, and it was a pressure they lived with every single day of their working lives. By the end of the day, as the light begins to fail and the bell for vespers, the evening prayer, rings through the monastery, Brother Thomas has completed perhaps only a single page of text. His back aches from the long hours of sitting in the same position. His eyes are strained from the intense focus. His fingers are stained with ink. He carefully cleans his quill pens, corks his ink pots, and covers his precious manuscript with a protective cloth. He has spent an entire day in the service of these holy words, a day of profound, silent, and deeply meaningful labor. He leaves the Scriptorium and makes his way back to the chapel for the evening prayers, his soul at peace. He is a scribe, a guardian of the flame of knowledge in a dark and often ignorant world. The life of a scribe was one of two distinct phases. First came the long, patient, and disciplined labor of the black-letter text, the creation of the body of the work. But after the main text of a section was complete, a new and even more meticulous phase of the work began. A phase that would transform the simple manuscript from a mere book into a sacred treasure. This was the art of illumination. Illumination was the process of adding gold, silver, and vibrant colors to the page. It was a way to glorify the Word of God, to give a physical, radiant beauty to the Holy Scriptures. For Brother Thomas, this was the most revered and the most nerve-wracking part of his craft. The work required a new set of tools, a new set of skills, and an even deeper level of meditative focus. His first task in the process of illumination was the application of gold leaf. He would be working on a page where a space had been left for a great ornate initial, the first letter of a new chapter. He would take a small pot of a substance called gesso. It was a thick, plaster-like mixture of gypsum, white lead, and a binding agent like fish glue. With a very fine brush, he would carefully paint this gesso onto the vellum, building it up in layers, creating a raised three-dimensional surface where the gold would be applied. This gesso had to be prepared perfectly. If it was too thin, it would not hold the gold. If it was too thick, it would crack. He would let it dry for a full day, until it was a hard, smooth, and slightly raised island of white on the creamy page. Then came the most delicate and magical part of the process. He would take his gilder's cushion, a small leather-padded board, and on it he would place a single, impossibly thin sheet of gold leaf. The gold had been beaten by a master craftsman until it was less than 1/1000th of a millimeter thick. A shimmering, ethereal sheet of pure metal, so light that a single breath could send it fluttering away into a useless, crumpled ball. He would then take a special tool, a gilder's tip, which was a very wide, flat brush made of soft squirrel hair. He would gently brush the tip against his own hair or cheek to create a small charge of static electricity. With this charge, he would lightly touch the gold leaf. The shimmering sheet would leap onto the brush, held there by the invisible force of the static. It was a moment that always felt like a small miracle. Now came the moment of supreme tension. He would take a deep, slow breath and then hold it. He could not breathe during this process, as his own exhalation could destroy the delicate gold leaf. He would lean over the page, and with a single, steady, and unwavering movement, he would press the gilder's tip down onto the dried, raised gesso. The gold leaf would instantly adhere to the surface. He would repeat this process with tiny, overlapping pieces of gold until the entire gessoed area was covered in a layer of the precious metal. But the work was not yet done. The gold was still matte and fragile. He would wait for the gesso to cure completely. Then he would take his burnisher. It was a simple tool, a smooth, hard, and polished piece of agate stone or a wolf's tooth set into a wooden handle. With this tool, he would begin to gently, methodically rub the surface of the gold leaf. At first, the rubbing was very light. Then, as the gold began to adhere more strongly, the pressure would increase. He would rub for hours, his movements small and circular, and as he worked, a transformation would occur. The dull matte surface of the gold would begin to shine. With every pass of the burnisher, it would become brighter, more reflective, until it was a brilliant mirror-like surface that seemed to capture and amplify the light of the room. It was no longer just a letter on a page. It was a tiny man-made sun, a piece of heaven on earth. After the gilding came the color. The pigments used by the monastic illuminators were a vibrant and often precious collection, sourced from all over the known world. The most prized of all was ultramarine blue. It was made by grinding the semi-precious stone lapis lazuli into a fine powder. This stone was mined only in a single remote region of Afghanistan, and it was brought to the monastery by a long and dangerous trade route that crossed deserts and mountains. It was more expensive than gold, and it was reserved only for the most important of illustrations, often the robe of the Virgin Mary. Other colors were made from more local sources. A brilliant red could be made from the mineral cinnabar, which contained toxic mercury, or from the bodies of dried Kermes insects. A vibrant green was made from the mineral malachite, or from verdigris, which was created by hanging copper plates over a vat of vinegar. A bright yellow was made from the precious saffron spice, or from a toxic mineral called orpiment, which contained arsenic. These pigments arrived at the monastery as dry colored powders. They had to be mixed with a binding agent to turn them into paint. The most common binder was egg tempera. Brother Thomas would take a fresh egg from the monastery's henhouse, crack it open, and carefully separate the yolk from the white. He would then mix the thick, sticky egg yolk with a small amount of the powdered pigment on a seashell or a small dish, adding a little water or honey to achieve the perfect consistency. With his small pots of vibrant, luminous paint now ready, he could begin the final stage of the illumination. He would take his finest brushes, made from the hairs of a squirrel or a stoat, and begin to paint the intricate floral borders and the small, detailed miniature illustrations that would bring the sacred text to life. This was not just decoration. It was a form of visual prayer, a way to tell the story of the Scriptures to those who could not read the words. It was the work of a lifetime, a slow, patient, and deeply holy act of creation. With his precious gold leaf burnished to a divine luster, and his small pots of vibrant egg-based tempera, paint mixed and ready, Brother Thomas could begin the final and most creatively demanding phase of his work, the painting of the illuminations. This was the process that would elevate the manuscript from a simple text into a radiant work of art, a sacred object worthy of the Word of God. His focus for the next several weeks would be a single page, the opening page of the Gospel of Mark. A large space had been left for a great ornate initial I of Anidium, the first word of the Gospel, and a miniature painting depicting the symbol of St. Mark, the winged lion. Before any paint was applied, he would first create a preliminary sketch of the design directly onto the vellum. Using a fine-tipped stylus made of lead or silver, the lines were faint, almost invisible, a ghostly guide for the paint to come. The work was incredibly slow and required an almost superhuman level of concentration. He would use his finest brushes, which he had made himself. They were fashioned from the delicate hairs of a squirrel or a stoat, carefully tied and set into the end of a hollow bird bone. For the most intricate details, like the pupil of an eye or the vein on a leaf, he used a brush that consisted of a single, perfect hair. He would begin by applying the base colors. With a steady, unwavering hand, he would fill in the larger areas of the design. He might lay down a sky of pale, luminous blue, or the deep, rich green of a grassy field. The egg tempera paint was thick and opaque, and it dried almost instantly, leaving no room for error. A single, misplaced brushstroke could ruin weeks of work. He worked in a state of deep meditative focus, his breathing slow and even. The Scriptorium, already a place of profound silence, seemed to grow even quieter as the illuminators focused on their delicate craft. The only sound was the faint, almost imperceptible whisper of a single hair brushing against the surface of the vellum. It was a silence filled with intense, creative energy. After the base colors were laid down, he would begin to add the layers of shading and highlights that would give the miniature its sense of depth and realism. He would mix a slightly darker shade of the base color and, with his single hair brush, apply a series of tiny, almost invisible lines and cross-hatchings to create the illusion of shadow. He would then do the same with a lighter shade to create highlights. It was a painstaking, microscopic process, the medieval equivalent of creating a higher resolution image, one pixel, one brushstroke at a time. As he worked on the figure of the winged lion, he was not just painting an animal. He was creating a sacred symbol, a visual representation of the power and majesty of the gospel. He would spend an entire day on a single small detail, the glint of divine light in the lion's eye, the intricate feathering of its great wings, the perfect calligraphic curve of its tail. Beyond the main miniature, he would also work on the decorative borders that framed the page of text. These were often a complex and beautiful tapestry of intertwined vines, leaves, and flowers, a style known as vine work. He would paint each leaf, each curling tendril with the same level of meticulous care as the central illustration, hidden within these beautiful, ordered borders. The monks would often allow themselves a small, strange, and secret creative outlet. They would paint small, whimsical, and sometimes bizarre little figures in the margins, figures known as drolleries. Adeline might paint a tiny, perfectly rendered monkey playing a lute, a knight in full armor engaged in a comical battle with a snail, or a strange hybrid beast with the head of a man and the body of a bird. These marginalia were a strange and wonderful part of the medieval manuscript tradition, a glimpse into the hidden, playful, and sometimes dark imagination of the monks who lived these lives of rigid discipline. It was a small, private space where they could express a spark of their own individuality, their own humor, and their own fears, safely hidden away in the decorative flourishes of the sacred page. The physical toll of this work was immense. Brother Thomas would spend his entire day hunched over his desk, his eyes focused on a tiny inch-square section of the page. The strain on his eyes was a constant burning pain, and many older scribes suffered from failing eyesight. The act of holding his hand, and his body perfectly still for hours on end, would leave his back and his shoulders a knot of aching muscle. His fingers, from the constant, precise gripping of the tiny brush, would often cramp. But the psychological state required for this work was one of pure, transcendent focus. It was a form of active, creative prayer. As he worked, the outside world, the cold of the monastery, the hunger in his belly, the distant memory of his old life would all dissolve. There was only the tip of his brush, the vibrant color, and the slow, miraculous emergence of a beautiful, sacred image on the page. In these moments, he was not just a copier. He was a true artist, a channel for the divine beauty of God's creation. Finally, after many weeks of this intense, focused labor, the page would be complete. He would hold it up to the light, and the effect would be breathtaking. The burnished gold of the great initial would gleam with the light of a real flame. The vibrant, luminous colors of the miniature and the borders would seem to glow from within. He had not just written the Word of God. He had made it beautiful. He had made it shine. It was a moment of profound, quiet, and deeply satisfying joy the true reward for his long and patient labor. The creation of an illuminated manuscript was a process that transcended mere craftsmanship. It was an act of profound and all-consuming devotion, a form of active prayer that engaged the scribe's body, mind, and soul for years, sometimes for his entire life. For Brother Thomas, every stroke of his pen, every touch of his brush, was a small offering to the glory of God. He and the other monks of the Scriptorium did not see themselves as simple copyists. They were soldiers of Christ, and the Scriptorium was their battlefield. They believed that the devil, the great adversary, despised the creation of holy books. They told stories in the cloister of how demons would haunt the Scriptorium, trying to tempt the scribes into error, to make their hands tremble, to spill their ink, to lead their thoughts astray. The act of writing, therefore, was a form of spiritual warfare. The intense concentration required to form each letter perfectly was a way to discipline the mind and to keep it focused on God. The profound silence of the room was a shield against the temptations of the outside world. Every beautifully formed letter was a small victory against the forces of darkness and ignorance. This sense of divine purpose was the fuel that sustained the scribes through the years of painstaking, often frustrating labor. The work was incredibly slow. A single, large, and lavishly illuminated Bible, like the one Thomas was working on, was not a project of months, but of years, sometimes decades. It could be the sole life's work of a single dedicated monk, or a multi-generational project for an entire scriptorium. Years pass. The seasons turn outside the tall, arched windows of the scriptorium, but inside, time is measured differently. It is measured not in days or weeks, but in the slow, steady progress of a page being completed, a chapter being finished, a gospel being bound. Brother Thomas grows older at his sloped wooden desk. His youthful, unlined face becomes etched with the faint, spidery lines of intense concentration. His eyesight, once sharp, begins to weaken from the long hours of focusing on microscopic details in the dim light. He now needs to use a reading stone, a piece of polished quartz or beryl, a primitive magnifying glass, to see the finest details of his work. His back, once straight and strong, is now permanently stooped from a lifetime of being hunched over his desk. His hands, once the hands of a young novice, are now the hands of a master craftsman. His fingers are stained with the permanent dark hue of iron gall ink, and the skin is calloused from the grip of the quill and the burnisher. But they are also incredibly steady, his movements sure and precise, his muscle memory containing a deep, intuitive knowledge of his craft. He is no longer just a copyist. He is now a senior member of the Scriptorium, a mentor to the younger novices who are just beginning their own long journey. He teaches them the ancient and secret art of cutting a quill to the perfect point. He shows them the correct way to mix the inks, the right amount of gum arabic to use to prevent the ink from bleeding on the vellum. He passes on the knowledge that was given to him, ensuring that the sacred craft will continue long after he is gone. One day, he is in the monastery's library, a dark, cool room where the finished manuscripts are stored. He is consulting an older master text, a beautiful psalter that was created in his own abbey 100 years before. On the final page of the book, he sees the colophon, a small inscription written by the scribe who had completed the work. It reads, "Brother Edwin, a humble servant of God, wrote this book with his own hand. May his soul rest in peace. Anno Domini 1150. Thomas looks at the beautiful, perfectly formed letters and feels a profound connection to this long-dead man. He feels the weight of his own place in this great unbroken chain of knowledge, a chain that stretches back to the earliest days of the church. He is a guardian of a sacred tradition, a keeper of a small but brilliant flame of learning in a world that was often dark and ignorant. This was the true meaning of his life. It was not a life of worldly power or riches. It was a life of quiet, anonymous, and deeply meaningful service. He would likely never see the great cities of the world, never know the love of a wife or a child. His world was the monastery. His family was his brothers. His life's work was this single, beautiful book. A book that might survive for 1,000 years, long after his own name. And even the memory of his existence had been completely forgotten. The Scriptorium was a place of community, but it was a silent, working community. At its head was the armorius, the master scribe, an old venerable monk who was the keeper of the library and the overall director of the Scriptorium's projects. He was a man of immense learning, and he would inspect the work of the other scribes, offering quiet, gestured corrections, ensuring that the high standards of the abbey were maintained. Beneath him were the different classes of workers. There were the simple copyists, the scriptors, like Thomas in his early years, who were responsible for the main body of the text. There were the rubricators, who specialized in the beautiful red-letter headings. And there were the illuminators, the master artists who created the golden initials and the vibrant miniature paintings. It was a highly organized and efficient system, a factory of the Holy Word. The years continued to pass. Thomas, now a man of advancing age, his hair a tonsured crown of gray, works on the final pages of his great manuscript, the Gospel of John. After more than 30 years of labor, the end of his life's work is finally in sight. The feeling is a complex one, a mixture of a deep, bone-weary satisfaction, a sense of a profound purpose almost fulfilled, and a strange, quiet sadness that the work that has defined his entire existence is coming to a close. He works with the same meticulous care on the last page as he did on the first. The vellum is as smooth as silk, the ink as black as a raven's wing, the letters as perfectly formed as the day he began. His hand, though now gnarled with age, is as steady as it has ever been. Finally, he writes the last word of the gospel. He pauses, his quill held above the page. He is finished. A profound silence seems to settle over his small desk, a silence that is different from the usual quiet of the Scriptorium. It is the silence of completion. But the work is not yet truly done. There is one final personal touch to be added. He turns to the very last page of the manuscript, a page that has been left blank. Here he will write the colophon, the scribe's personal inscription. It was a tradition that allowed the otherwise anonymous monk to leave a small, personal mark on his life's work. With a fresh quill, he writes in a simple, clear script. This book was written by the hand of Thomas, a humble monk of this abbey. He began this work in the year of our Lord 1247, and by the grace of God, he has completed it in this year. 1282, for 35 years. This has been his labor. May the reader pray for his soul, and may God have mercy on him, a sinner. He adds a final, common scribe's curse, and may he who steals this book be struck down by the wrath of the Almighty. Amen. With the colophon complete, the manuscript is now ready for its final transformation. The loose stacks of vellum pages, The work of a lifetime must now be bound into a single permanent object. This is another highly skilled craft, performed by a specialized monk, the bookbinder. Thomas watches as the bookbinder takes his precious pages. The vellum sheets are carefully folded and gathered into signatures. The binder then uses a special frame to sew these signatures together with thick, strong linen thread, creating the solid block of the book's text. Then come the covers. They are made from thick, heavy slabs of oak, which are cut to size and beveled at the edges. The bookbinder then covers these wooden boards with a piece of fine, soft leather, which is carefully folded and glued into place. The final and most beautiful part of the process is the decoration of the cover, which might be tooled with intricate patterns or even adorned with precious metals and jewels if the book is of particular importance. Finally, the block of sewn pages is attached to the leather-bound covers. The book is placed in a great wooden press for several days, the immense pressure ensuring that the binding is strong and permanent. When it emerges, it is no longer a collection of loose pages. It is a book, a single, solid, and sacred object, a treasure of the monastery, a vessel of knowledge that with care will survive for 1,000 years. The day's work in the scriptorium is now for Thomas. Over the bell for vespers rings, its familiar, resonant toll, signaling the end of the afternoon. He and the other monks clean their tools, cover their work, and file out of the great quiet room. They make their way to the chapel for the evening prayers, their voices once again joining in the ancient, beautiful chant. After the simple evening meal and the final prayer service of Compline, the great silence descends upon the monastery. It is a sacred rule that from this moment until the first service of the next morning, no monk may speak a word. It is a time for quiet contemplation, for rest, for the soul to prepare itself for the coming night. Brother Thomas walks through the cold, dark cloister back to his cell in the dormitory. He is an old man now. His back is permanently stooped, his eyes are weak, and his fingers are stained with a lifetime's worth of ink. He has spent his entire adult life within these stone walls, his existence a quiet, unchanging cycle of prayer and labor. He lies down on his simple straw pallet, the same one he has slept on for 50 years. He closes his eyes. He has not built a kingdom, or fought in a great battle, or amassed a worldly fortune, but he has done something else. He has taken a flickering, fragile flame, the flame of knowledge, of Scripture, of a story, and he has protected it. He has spent his life creating a single, beautiful, and enduring vessel for that light. And in the great dark ocean of the Middle Ages, that was a life of profound and heroic purpose. And so the long, quiet, and devoted life of Brother Thomas comes to a close. His is a story of immense patience, a testament to the men who dedicated their entire existence to the preservation of knowledge. It is a story written not in the grand deeds of kings or knights, but in the silent scratch of a quill on parchment, in the vibrant color of a hand-mixed paint, and in the golden gleam of a perfectly illuminated letter. The great book is finished, its sacred words protected for 1,000 years to come. And now your journey for tonight can come to a peaceful close as well. There are no more pages to rule, no more letters to form. There is only the quiet of this moment. Let the story fade, and allow your mind to drift into a deep and well-deserved rest. Sleep well.